We'll talk to Assistant Indigenous Australians Minister Malarndirri McCarthy about the situation in Alice Springs and about the prospects of the Voice referendum in a moment. For our own correspondent Matt Cunningham, who's been covering the problems in Alice Springs for many months in such a tireless fashion, he broke down on air on Friday as he spoke about how he hoped some of the problems for women and children in the communities can be fixed.
This week, much of what's been reported here in Alice Springs has been framed as a black versus white issue. Every single person speaking in that story was Aboriginal. That was September last year, and they were crying out for help. Have a look at this place. It is the most beautiful place in the world, you know, the heart of this country, but it's breaking at the moment.
Matt, it's been a big week for you. That story back in September obviously affected you so much as well. I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but why is it so tough for you? Can you put into words just kind of what you're seeing day to day, and what would you tell us here in the city that we don't see?
I've been reporting on this stuff for a long time, Laura, and I see that the country cares. It cares for about 5 minutes and then it moves on and doesn't care anymore. So, you know, maybe we've got a chance here that, you know, we are focused on this for once, and maybe something will actually happen and something will change.
And joining me now is the Assistant Minister for Indigenous Australians, Malarndirri McCarthy. Senator McCarthy, thanks so much for joining us. You heard Matt Cunningham there talk about the spotlight being on Alice Springs for 5 minutes and then the country doesn't care anymore. Do you think that's a fair assessment of one of the difficulties with dealing with this problem? Do you think there'll be a fix this time?
I completely understand where Matt's coming from, and he's done a tremendous job over so many years. And I think what we've seen just through his reporting is the trauma, Andrew, that people are feeling right across Alice and Central Australia in particular, that there are traumatised families and people, and we have to be ever conscious of that, even in our own coverage, whether it's politicians or the media. So there is an important layer here that I'm incredibly mindful of. And yes, I think, you know, what Matt says is true in terms of the focus. I do believe that now that we have this focus nationally, that there will be positive change.
What sort of announcement can we expect from the federal government and Northern Territory government later this week?
Well, certainly the Northern Territory government knows that it has to have a report to the Prime Minister this week. We have made that very clear in our discussions with them last week. We want to see, and obviously with Darrell Anderson, a woman who's got great links throughout Central Australia and experience certainly with the young people, will provide that report. But we have to make sure, Andrew, and this is where I'm concerned, and certainly Marion Scrimgeour as the member for Lingiari, is that it's about action, that certainly we have to move and give confidence to the families and businesses of Alice Springs and Central Australia that they will be safe and that there is a future and a way through this.
Is it time we went back to an alcohol ban in town camps at Alice Springs, back to the rules we had before the change last year?
Yes, it's interesting hearing all the debate about that. I mean, I don't know if you've heard, but certainly here in Darwin, the Lord Mayor's asked for those bans to be spread across Darwin City and the Northern Territory. So there is a broader conversation across the Northern Territory around alcohol. In Alice Springs itself, though, Andrew, we have to stay focused with them. This is where the report this week that comes from the Northern Territory government is absolutely critical. The federal government has urged the NT government to ensure that there is the opportunity to opt out for communities. And they have the power here in the Northern Territory through the Legislative Assembly to do that. And so this week is going to be a critical moment.
Now, Peter Dutton wants a Royal Commission into child sex abuse in the Northern Territory. What do you think of that?
Well, I'd say to Peter Dutton, and I've said this before, Andrew, is that we have established a bipartisan joint parliamentary committee with that House of Reps and the Senate looking directly into the Northern Territory. And there is every possibility that should he wish for further examination through that Joint Parliamentary Committee, which I co-signed with Senator Nampijinpa Price, for a look into the Northern Territory's stronger futures and going forward, then that can be looked at through that particular committee. And at the moment, I think there's a lot of weariness, Andrew, of people forever being asked questions. So if there's an opportunity now through this current inquiry, joint parliamentary inquiry, then that's the process I'd urge Peter Dutton to go through.
Well, he also wants a John Howard-style intervention at Alice Springs because he thinks the problems with child sexual abuse are so dire. What do you say to that suggestion?
Well, I've been asked throughout the week about the calls for the ADF and intervention of that nature. And I've just reminded viewers and listeners across Australia that in 2007, when that did occur, with the Army coming in and soldiers coming in, there was a great level of panic and heightened concern. So there is a leftover trauma from that experience for a lot of families. And I would caution against wanting to call the ADF in. I think we are trying to, this week, move on something very quickly. And obviously the national media, I'm sure, but so will the people of Alice Springs, keep us to our word that we've got to change it as of this week.
How could a voice to Parliament address any of these sorts of issues?
Well, there's lots of ways that can occur. I'm mindful there's two things going on here. One is a sense of urgency to deal with this right now. But the voice to Parliament is a broader question for all First Nations people across the country and for all Australians, Andrew. And it is about the ability to be a part of decisions that are made into the future regarding legislation, regarding policy, so that First Nations people through the Australian Parliament are able to advise the Executive and the Parliament. And I think that's an important point, that we can achieve that and we should achieve that. And hopefully this time next year we may have achieved that.
Now, our correspondent there, Matt Cunningham, he's made the point throughout the week that Marion Scrimgeour in her maiden speech last July warned about these problems, that she was a strong Indigenous voice within Anthony Albanese's own government and she could not be heard. So he's kind of asked out of that, what use is a voice body when you've got a voice within the Parliament or a couple of voices and you don't listen to them?
Look, I think that's going to always come up. I've heard to the fact that people think by having 11 First Nations people in the Parliament, isn't that voice enough? But Andrew, when you reflect on the fact since 1901, if this is the first time our country can have 11 Indigenous reps, then that's been way too long. So I think we have to be mindful of the way we have these conversations. There is no doubt that Marion Scrimgeour is listened to, and there is no doubt too that Senator Price is listened to. And we've seen that with the Parliament. But we can also see more from First Nations people who are not party political that should be able to have a say whether there are Aboriginal people in Parliament or not.
So you've got the Greens Senator Lydia Thorpe saying she'll oppose the voice and there should be a treaty. What do you make of her opposition, and could the government support a treaty down the track?
Look, I think it's interesting that Senator Thorpe has made the position and the stance that she has, and obviously separating herself, what appears to be separating herself from her party. We know that the Greens, Adam Bant, as the leader, has supported it. It's in their platform, it's in the support of their supporters across the country. Now, treaty is occurring in each state and territory jurisdiction, Andrew. So that is, in fact, Victoria is actually one of the first. So Senator Thorpe's own state has already embarked on that. So I find it curious that that they think that treaty's not occurring. We see in South Australia they've already got a voice that they're planning to put to the South Australian Parliament in the next couple of months. In Queensland, treaty's already underway with discussions there. So each state and territory jurisdiction has begun, and I'm very interested to have a further discussion on that in the Senate when we return next month.
All right, but just to that second part of that question, do you think a treaty nationally could follow a voice if it's successful?
Well, part of the Uluru Statement from the Heart is voice treaty truth. And we know that certainly the Australian government has accepted as a whole the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We're also looking at the McCarthy Commission. We're looking at truth-telling. These are elements of the Uluru Statement that we do take seriously and will follow through to the best of our ability.
Peter Dutton told Sky News last Thursday he would take up Anthony Albanese's offer of meeting the working group on the referendum. Do you have any further information in relation to when that might occur?
Look, I certainly have not been privy to the conversations, obviously, between the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, but I can say this, Andrew, that this week I'm actually going to Canberra this week because of a number of meetings, and a couple of those meetings will be with the referendum working group and the referendum engagement group, and it's quite likely that that's what Peter Dutton has been invited to in terms of the working group, and I think and I hope that's an invitation that he does accept because it's important that he is able to meet with those members of the group.
And just finally, Malarndirri McCarthy, David Littleproud is on the program with Kieran in a minute, the Nationals leader. He's already signalled the Nationals will oppose the Voice before seeing further detail. What is your message to him?
Look, I did say this last year, Andrew, that I was deeply disappointed in the Nationals leader and the Nationals for making such a preemptive decision when they hadn't received the detail or even had the opportunity to do what I hope Peter Dutton's going to do, and that is meet with the engagement working group and the referendum group working group. So I think that, if David Littleproud is reconsidering his position, I'd warmly encourage that. I'd certainly urge the Nationals to completely reconsider their decision. This is an important time in our country's history, and it would be wonderful if we could all walk together on this.
Malarndirri McCarthy, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Andrew.